Michelle Cook, and I'm the Associate Director for our Westside Student Life. Many of you may not know what the Westside may mean, but Westside Student Life incorporates our centers at Linwood, Des Moines, and Pierce County JBLM. And what I call as a COVID lining, aka silver lining, is that student life has now expanded to not only be statewide, but globally too. So we are thankful for all of you who are in attendance today, and to those of you who may be watching the video later on, as this event is being recorded. Before we get started, I would like to take a moment to say thank you to my CAP team, the Campus Activities Coordinators. Without them, Student Life would not be able to put on so many wonderful events to offer our students and our surrounding community. So please, will all my CAP team just give a wave and turn on your cameras? And I also want to say, be sure to like us on our Facebook page and our Instagram account to keep informed of all things Central, and those links will be placed in the chat. And now, before I hand it off to Shafiq to introduce our wonderful speaker, we would like to collectively take a moment to acknowledge all the Indigenous and First People of the land and space in which we live and breathe. For our Westside community, we recognize that we are on occupied Duwamish, Snohomish, Coastal Salish, Muckleshoot, and Puyallup lands. And we want to thank all relations and tribes today as we prepare to hold space as a community. We recognize that all of us are joining this conversation from different areas. So we also want to invite you to reflect and thank Indigenous and First People of the land and spaces in which you are coming from today. Thank you. And now I give you Shafiq, and he's our Wildcat extraordinaire who's putting on this event today. And thank you so much, Shafiq, and I'll hand it off to you.
Thanks, Michelle. Good evening, everyone. First of all, thank you very much to Michelle for making this possible. And thank you to my CAT team for supporting and helping out whichever they can. And also, thank you for to our keynote speaker for being able to be here tonight. So a little introduction of the keynote speaker. The keynote speaker, she has been involved in and around schools for 30 years and has taught in a variety of environments, from predominantly Black to predominantly white to some of the most diverse communities in the nation. She also received an award as the most innovative foreign language teacher in 2007, and in 2008 was the Washington State Milken Educator of the Year. And in addition to that, she also received recognition at the White House in March of 2013 as a champion of change and was Washington State PTA's outstanding educator in 2015. Now, after serving as a classroom teacher and instructional coach, Erin worked as an executive for 2 state superintendents. She left her job to run as a candidate for state superintendent and was the first Black woman to run for any state office in Washington State, a race she lost by a mere 1%. Now, with the whole pandemic happened and stopped schools and travel in March, Erin decided to take her skills and passion online and offered 83 days of free teaching to both children and adults from mid-March to the end of June. Now, she has logged thousands and thousands of hours on Zoom delivering keynotes, doing school assemblies, and providing training to ground agencies, nonprofits, and schools. And she continues to facilitate free virtual gatherings for adults and children several days per week. Without further ado, Erin Jones.
Well, good evening, everyone. I am excited to be here. You know, one of the things that I have come to believe as a public speaker, sometimes you have 5 people in a room, and sometimes 5,000. But one of the things that I believe is that the people who are supposed to be in the room are in the room. So thank you to those of you who are personally here. I'm glad that this will be recorded and other folks have the opportunity to listen as well later. I want to share a little bit of my story and why the birthday and this celebration of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. is so important to me. But I want to first start by saying to you that Although we often celebrate Dr. King's birthday as if it's a Black holiday for Black people, it's actually an American holiday. He happens to be a Black man, and he did fight for the rights of Black people, but he also fought for the rights of poor people of all colors. And so I think sometimes we make his legacy very small. We make it just about Black and white. And really, he was about all people in this country being able to have access to resources. And so I want to start with that even though I'm a Black woman, oftentimes we see Black people talking about Dr. King and we think this is just a way to celebrate Black people. This is about us as American people. This is about us being a nation that had someone like Dr. King who protested in nonviolent ways. As we think about our own country right now, I think there's so much that he back in the 50s, 60s that we need to be learning from right now today. And so I think what I want to do tonight is, because we a small group, I'd love to do some interaction here. And so what I'm going to propose is that I share a little bit of how I learned about Dr. King, share some of his words, and then hear from you all. As you think about this moment in time, what does this all mean for you? What is his story? Because here's the reality. I believe that Dr. King's words matter as much right now in 2021 as they did in 1966 or 1967. I believe it's as important right now in this moment. And I'm hoping that I can help us connect his words from the past to this moment that we're living in right now. So in order to do that, I want to create a little bit of context for you. I will be 50 years old this year. So I turn, it's kind of weird. Thinking about 50, I've been trying to run hard away from 50, but I got 5 more months and I'll be 50 years old. Why is that important? Because I was born in a time when Black and white were not allowed to be together in marriage. So you may not know this about American history, but until 1968, it was actually illegal in most places in the United States for a Black man to marry a white woman. Now, even though I was born 3 years later, it was still unacceptable where I was born to be in a relation for a white woman and a Black man to be in relationship. Now, the place that I was born, when you hear it, you're going to say, oh, I know that place. If I had said where I was born a year ago, you would have had no idea where this place was. It has just made the map this year, unfortunately. But I was born in a place called Minneapolis, Minnesota, which has become, unfortunately, very famous this year. But I was born out of the body of a white woman. And she was forced to leave me in the hospital because she was not allowed to keep me. Now, abortion did not become legal until 1973. So even though she was told she couldn't keep me, she also couldn't abort me. So imagine carrying a child that you know you can't keep. And I think about that as a mother who's birthed children. I think about what must that have felt like to carry a baby for 9 months that you know you can't keep. And so she leaves me in the hospital and she walks away and never comes back. So the name on my birth certificate for my mother is Norwegian woman. The name on my birth certificate for my father is Negro man. I want you to just think about that for a second. And so that is my beginning. I was sent to an orphanage. I started life in an orphanage. When I was 3 months old, a white couple decided to come and visit the orphanage and adopt babies. And they asked the director, who are the babies nobody wants? We want to adopt one of them. And the director would say to my parents, oh, the Black babies, of course, nobody wants them. And at the time in 1971, 90% of Black babies would never be adopted. That is not any different today in 2021. It is still about 90% of Black babies in Minnesota will never be adopted. So I want you to think about where were we? Where are we? We haven't grown a lot in a lot of ways. And so my parents decided, well, we're going to adopt a Black baby. And my dad tells the story of walking through the nursery at the Children's Home Society, seeing me in my crib and saying, oh, she's the one we want. I was chosen by a family. I think that's kind of awesome. I don't see myself as given away or rejected. I see myself as chosen by a family. But the day I was chosen, my parents were disowned by both sides of their family for adopting a Negro baby. So I need you to understand the history of this, okay? So even though I was born after Dr. King died, all that work that he did, even when I was born 3 years, 4 years later, still so much work to be done. Now, my father's side of the family ended up accepting me, my mother's side, not so much. And so my parents in 1976 decided we're just going to leave the country. And I would spend the rest of my childhood at the American School of The Hague in the Netherlands. The Netherlands is a tiny little country right next to Germany. I went to school with the ambassadors of the United Nations children. So very, very powerful people's children. Every American president who came to the United Nations also walked the halls of my school building. So I want you to imagine abandoned in a hospital, adopted by a family who were disowned, suddenly sitting in a chair next to very powerful people's children. And I would have a really life-changing experience as a 9-year-old kid. At 9 years old, my best friend was the Israeli ambassador's daughter. Her name was Yael. And at the time, Israel and Palestine were in the middle of a huge, they've been in conflict forever, but they were definitely in a big conflict at the time. And all I knew was she was 9 years old and she was scared for her family. And then I went to a PTA meeting. And I don't know how many of you grew up in America, but PTA is the Parents and the Teachers Association. And they get together and they buy stuff for the school. And my parents dragged me to this meeting. And I planned to just sit in the back corner and watch the adults. Actually, I was just going to read a book. I didn't want to watch the adults. They're boring. And I get into the back of the room and I look at the table in the center of the room and who's sitting there? But the ambassador from Israel is sitting at the table. My friend's dad is at the table, but guess who else is at the table? The Palestinian ambassador is also at the same table. So Israel, Palestine at war, and the dads are sitting at the same table together to talk about the education of their children. And I had a revelation that day. If these dads could sit together and talk about school for their children, I bet I could get them to talk about peace for their countries. I thought that, really, at 9 years old. And so I began to learn to speak Arabic and Hebrew. As a 9-year-old kid, I knew instinctively in my head, man, the only way I'm going to get them to talk to each other is if I can speak both of their languages and I can be a bridge. And so I began to learn Arabic and Hebrew. I was a weird kid. I'm still weird, but I was definitely a weird little kid. And about 3 months later, we would get a visit from the president of Egypt's wife. So the president of Egypt at the time in 1981 was a guy named Anwar Sadat. And Anwar Sadat was in the middle of a civil war. In Egypt, there was a civil war. And his wife had decided if I could just help little kids commit to peace, maybe we could change war, stop war. And she decided to try out an assembly at elementary schools. And where would she start was our school, because we had 70 different languages represented. We had all of these warring countries represented in my school. And so she would come to my school when I was 9 years old, and she would do a speech. And after her speech, she asked the 4th grade teacher, so who are the children most likely to change the world? I want to take them out to lunch. 3 of them. She said, I want 3 children to take out to lunch. And guess who got chosen? I got chosen at 9 years old to have lunch with the president's wife. And here's what would happen at lunch. She would ask the 3 little kids, what are you going to do to change the world? And I said to her, I'm going to solve the Middle East crisis. I'm learning to speak Arabic and Hebrew, and I'm going to bring peace to the Middle East. And she did not laugh at me that day. She looked at me and she pointed at me in the face and she said, you, Erin, are a world changer. Not you're gonna be someday, not you have all this potential. You, Erin, are a world changer. And I knew that day I wanted to change the world. Flash forward to high school. I get to high school and I want to change the world somehow. And I'm a 10th grade student. I'm 15 years old. And one day, this woman who ran a history program found me in the hallway and she said, there's this man, Dr. King, and this is the first year we have a national holiday in America for his birthday. Would you give a speech? And I said, Dr. King, who's that? Because you know what? He was not in my textbook yet. And I said, I don't know who he is. And she said, well, I'll get you some books, but I want you to give a speech about Dr. King. And so as a 15-year-old kid, I'm almost 50, y'all. As a 15-year-old kid, I gave my very first Martin Luther King Jr. speech. I will never forget reading his words on the page and watching his story. And I knew at 15 years old, I want to live a life like Dr. King. I absolutely want to be peaceful, nonviolent. That's what resonated for me. I loved that he nonviolent protest. I loved that he loved to read. He loved learning. I loved to read. I loved learning. I loved the law just like him. And so I made a decision at 15 years old. I want to be like this. And I began to read everything I could by him, about him. And at 18 years old, I would come back to the United States for college. I planned to get a law degree and go back to work in the United Nations. But I got to America in 1989. And one of the first things I realized is we as America had not grown as much as I thought we had. I had studied American history. I knew about slavery. I knew about civil rights. I thought we were living like Will Smith, because Will Smith was really popular in Europe when I was a senior in high school. There were some other famous Black people that I thought every Black person in America lives like that in 1989. And I came to an America that still was dealing with racial issues. And literally my first day in America, we're going to my college campus, and there's a sign right down the street from my campus. And it says this: Bryn Mawr was the name of the town that my college was in. Cricket club. I don't know how many of you know cricket. Maybe some of you know cricket. Americans don't really play cricket, y'all. So I see some of you from other places. Other countries play cricket. Most Americans do not play cricket. In America, the only people who play cricket are very rich white people. You don't see a lot of other people playing cricket in America. And I knew right away, oh, okay, this neighborhood's going to be interesting. And on the sign, it says Bryn Mawr Cricket Club, no coloreds or Jews allowed here. It means no Black people. It's on the sign, on the main street, not from my college campus. I'm in trouble to get to America. And so I didn't tell I just kept going to school. I was called the N-word every day. Horrible things happened. I almost killed myself my first year of college. And then one day I on a basketball court, a couple miles away from my college campus. And there was an NBA player that day getting ready to play with his boys. And he saw me walking down the street and he said, "Hey, we need one more player. Come play with us." And I would play with this very famous NBA player that day. And it wasn't him that changed my life. I got to talk to 3 high school Black boys that night. And all of them had dropped out of high school. And they talked about schools in America that were terrible. Lived in the Black part of the city, the school was falling apart and there weren't enough books and there weren't enough chairs. And if you went to school in the white part of town, there were lots of computers and they had all kinds of extra stuff. And I knew that day at 18 years old how I wanted to change the world. As much as I loved the Middle East, I knew in that moment I had been made in America, but raised in Europe. I had been made Black and white. And I made a decision to America. I called my parents that night and I said, I'm not coming back. And I never went back. I never went back to Europe. I've been teaching for the last 31 years here in the United States. And Dr. King is still my motivation. He is the reason that I do the work I do. Today, I do about 4 or 5 events a day. So this is my craziest. But I believe more than ever in this season of time, as we look at the events that have happened over 7 days, 10 days in our nation, more than ever, the words of Dr. King are absolutely powerful. And so I want to share some of my favorite words of Dr. King with you tonight. And then I would love to have a conversation with you about what you're thinking and how Dr. King's message resonates for you. One of the things he says is people fail to get along because they fear each other. They fear each other because they don't know each other. They don't know each other because they have not communicated with each other. One of the things I absolutely believe as a teacher, I get to teach now all over the country, is that we don't talk to each other. So if you live in the city, you don't talk to people from the country. If you live in Southeast Seattle, you don't talk to people from North Seattle. North Seattle is where most of the white people live. Southeast Seattle is where most of the Black and brown people live. We are not talking to each other. And so here's what happens. You see me and you tell my story thinking you know me, because we don't talk to it. We don't share one another's stories. And so as I think about even Republicans, Democrat, Black versus white, we are not talking to one another. And so exactly what Dr. King said, we fear the unknown. We fear those that we don't speak to. And so one of my messages to people when I talk to young people is, what if we were to just share our stories with one another? What if we were to create space for people to share their stories with one another? Because if I have 5 stories about Muslim people, then I can no longer say all Muslim people are like this. If I have 5 stories about Native American people, I can no longer say all Native, but this is what's happened in America. We have one story about all Black people, one story about all Muslim people. And what that means is we're afraid because we don't know. So my first message to you is we listen to other people and personalize them and their differences. The other thing he said is we must learn to live together or we will perish together. I tell my little children, but also my students in middle school. I taught middle school for a long time. So you don't have to like each other every day, but you do love each other. And here's what I mean by that. I believe Dr. King calls us to a kind of love that's not a mushy, let's all get along, hug. He calls us to a kind of love that says, you know what? I, as a member of my family, even if we don't agree all the time, I don't know how many of you have brothers and sisters, but I have 3 children. They're a year apart. So they're 23, 24, 25. They do not always get along, y'all, especially for young. They got into those fights every once in a while. But you know what? If they need anything right now, any one of them can call the other one and they will take off whatever they're doing and go take care of their brother or sister. That's what Dr. King is calling us to. When your neighbor down the street calls and says, man, my car broke down, can you take me to the store? Are we willing to get out of our own way and just reach out and show love and compassion? In the middle of this pandemic, is there an elderly person on your block that, man, their health is not great and they can't get out of their house, but they don't have family that can come? Are you willing to reach out and help them? We have lots of opportunities right now during this pandemic, people, but we got out of our own way and we have to see our neighbor as our brother or sister. Another thing he says, it is not possible to be in favor of justice for some and not be in favor of justice for all. And I think a lot of times in the United States, we get up in, whether it's Black Lives Matter or thinking about serving our Native American communities or Asian, we get all broken up instead of combining as one force and saying, we are gonna make sure that everyone gets what they need. We get divided in our little pockets and we end up fighting against each other for that little piece of the pie. Instead of, let's say, let's all join forces to make sure that we all have what we need to thrive. And again, Dr. King tends to be remembered as someone who fought for the rights of Black people, but the reality is he was murdered the day before he was getting ready to start the Poor People's Campaign, which was not about Black people, it was about poor people. It was about making sure that all poor people had what they need. So what if immigrants and refugees and undocumented people and Black people all united and said, what can we do to make all people get what they need instead of fighting against each other for that little piece of the pie? So I'm going to encourage us to think about where are there opportunities for you in your community to fight together with other people. Here's another thing he says, history will have to record that the greatest tragedy of period social transition was not the strident clamor of bad people. So not bad people yelling mean things at people. That's not what history will record, but the appalling silence of the good people. So he said he's not so worried about people in KKK hats or Nazis, but what about all the people who are absolutely right now, who are saying nothing in the face of what is happening across our country? That's what history will record. So last 2, darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that. And so I want to encourage us as we our neighbor, whatever way they voted, whatever they look like or sound like, can we choose love? And again, love does not mean that you have to like or agree with anything someone says, but it does mean we have to center their humanity. We have to see their pure humanness as equally valuable to our own, that we are not better than anyone else because of something we believe or a way that we look. What if we could center the humanity of each person around us? That's what he's saying. When somebody says something nasty to you, don't fire back with nasty. There's nothing better than when someone calls a word, which they do on occasion, just smile back. Good to meet you. My name's Erin. What's your name? You know what? That shocks. They don't know what to do with that. They're ready for the anger. They're ready for hate back. Do you know it messes with people when you come back at them with love? And so to kill people with kindness. And my best friend is on right now. She can tell you, she has witnessed this. When people say things or do nasty things, I will turn and smile. Hey, good to meet you. My name's Erin. I don't think I know you. Because the reality is most hate that which they don't even know. So when people say hateful things to me, usually it's people that don't even know who I am. And so why give them the energy of my hate? I choose to respond with love. Last quote, and then I'd love to hear from you all about how you're moving through this time. This one for me applies to this moment in our nation's history. So when we think about the events of last week on the Capitol, I live in our state capital in Olympia. You may not be aware of this, but like the nation's capital attacked, our state also was attacked. I actually know the governor, and he was home, and people took, they got over it to his home. Fortunately, he was able to escape. But I mean, because I know him, just thinking of how scary that must have been to be in his home as people were trying to scale the wall of his house, that's just terrifying. But as I think about this last quote that I want to read, I want you to think about the events of the last week, but also of Black Lives Matter, also of Antifa, also of the ways that the anti-maskers have gone to our state capitals across the nation. People who think that the election was stolen. I want you to think all the ways that people have protested this year. And I want you to hear Dr. King's voice. He says this, but it is not enough for me to stand before you tonight and condemn riots. It would be really irresponsible for me to do that without at the same time condemn contingent, intolerable conditions that exist in our society. These conditions are the things that cause individuals to feel that they have no other alternative than to engage in violent rebellions to get attention. I want you to hear this part now. And I must say tonight that a riot is the language of the unheard. I'm going to say that again. A riot is the language of the unheard. And what is it that America has failed to hear? It has failed to hear that the promises of freedom and justice have not been met. So I want to leave you with that thought tonight. The freedom, all the promises that were made, the American dream, I would argue that they are still not available to everyone in this country. As much as we love to think and we'd wish it be true, they are not equally available to everyone. And so I want to encourage you, especially students, especially you young people, to think about where are the places in my community where I could be part of the solution? Where are the places in my community where people don't have access, where I could use my voice to be a bridge to resources and opportunities for others in my community who may not have a voice, who may not have opportunity. I'm going to leave you with that tonight. And open space, I think I'll turn it back over to Shafiq to manage. I'd love to answer any questions you have.
Thank you, Erin. Yeah, absolutely, especially in this difficult time, especially with what happened last week. I think those codes are impacted us the most on the issues of like how we can just work together as brothers and sisters. And one of the quotes that I think that by Martin Luther King that stuck to me the most, that I think reflects what it is important, is what he said in 1947 in a Morehouse College student newspaper. It's called the Maroon Tiger. And he said, it's short and simple, but he said, intelligence plus character, that is the goal of true education. Now that made me think, that made me stop and think, that is actually true. If you just have education without character, you can't have either one. You got to have both, and that I think is, I agree with that wholeheartedly. I agree with that. If any of our participants would like to share any quotes or anything from Dr. King, please unmute yourself or just type in the chat. And if you're comfortable with sharing, you're more than welcome to do so.
It kind of is shocking to me because I haven't heard anyone share this story before, and I didn't learn this when I was in China. Like the history book that I learned from elementary to high school, they didn't even mention about all those like things in America. And I appreciate that you are willing to share those information. And I think lots of things that you said earlier resonate with me, and especially when it relates to justice. I recently heard a quote from a person from one of the workshops. I will put this in the chat. It says, "Without a shared story and a vision of life, society as a whole cannot agree on what justice means." I think it's very true. Like when we don't think about the noun, this justice, we think about democracy, we think about communism, we think even like professionalism. Like there's that word called professionalism in every single class syllabus I have. But what is this? I mean, I think when I feel like my professor, some of them, they see professionalism in different way, but they just assume this includes some standards that do not need to be expressed. But another class that I was taking, and the professor Cody, he mentioned the word democracy like trace back to so many years, and it's created by somebody else, and it has like history of developing the meaning of this word. And I think that's the importance of kind of learning the true history of every single word that's important. When people go anti something as a group, I think it's important for each of them who are being active on that event to know what you're saying, to be very conscious about things. Because sometimes, like, even I realize sometimes every single thing I said, maybe some words I don't even fully realize what I mean. So I appreciate that you kind of brought this up, and it resonated with me very well. And thank you. And another aspect I'm thinking that I heard one of my friends have that experience, like during the COVID, and he was being called upon. Like an elder, she told him go back to China. So he shared this in one of the workshop that I attended before, and then that resonated with me too, because I'm from China. So I wonder, like, what are the practical tips that you can give when we actually have like missed something like this? And I think I'm more curious about your mindset. Like when you encounter something that's very difficult, like on emotional level, like how do we recognize the emotion that triggered within us, at the same time make the action that can solve the potential problem right away? Like you mentioned earlier, when somebody tell you something that kind of is unpleasant, you know that this person don't know you, so you tell that person, "Hey, I'm Erin. Well, what's your name? I don't think I know you." And I think for this set of action, there are like some strong tips, like mindset that you have that lead you to a source of action like this. So I'm curious on what you have to say for this part. Thank you.
So part of it is getting old. So, just going through it. When you've heard words so many times against you, you just have to develop a mindset. One of the things that I decided at 23 or 24, I am worthy. I am worthy. I am smart, and I'm worthy of being treated like a human. And so when someone chooses to say something to me that's not human, and it doesn't speak to worth, I just don't receive it. I don't receive it. And when I was younger, I probably wouldn't have said it back. I would just walk away. One of the things that I tell high school students is too often we give other people our energy. So somebody calls you to go back to your country, don't speak Spanish here, we're in America. Oftentimes we give people too much of our energy who don't deserve it, right? Like if that person says go back to China, they don't deserve your energy. And so it's not worth sometimes the best thing to do is just to turn around and walk the other way. They don't deserve your energy. So there are times when I don't respond to people, and other times where, okay, this is an opportunity to teach. Teacher, I have 30 years of teacher training, right? So I know how to teach people. You may not yet be there. So it may take you a little bit of time, but you have to decide in the moment, is this someone who's ready to be taught? Or is this someone that actually could be dangerous to me? Right? If it's another student, then maybe it's an opportunity to educate. Otherwise, you just need to turn around and walk away, because they're trying to steal your value and they deserve your value. So you need to walk away.
Got it. Thank you so much.
Welcome. Is it Shashir? Is that thank you? And how do you say thank you?
谢谢.
Shashir. I thought so. Okay.
Yeah, it's in thank you in Mandarin. Thank you.
Yes, that's what I thought. Okay. Anybody else? Questions or thoughts?
One of our participants mentioned in the chat box, Chuck, said that Dr. King, one of Dr. King's quotes was, "Darkness cannot drive out darkness, only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate, only love can do that."
Yeah.
And I think that is one of his most powerful quotes. Negative and negative cannot go together. You know, it has to be, negativity has to be fought with positivity. You know, as what you mentioned before, when someone approaches you and just say, "Hey, you know, I'm Erin. I don't think I know you. You know, I think I'm going to start doing that with, if something like that happens to me. I think I'm going to approach that in that way. You know, you think it's better that way." Also, we received a question, I think, to you, asking your opinion, and perhaps the participants, if they'd like to join. First question is, what do you think Dr. King would say to us in this moment right now? That with everything that's going on right now, with whatever happened last week and coming Wednesday, what do you think Dr. King would say to us in this moment?
So I'll let students go first, and then I'll jump in on that question. Anybody else thoughts?
Yes, any other participants would like to give an insight on what do you think Dr. King would say to us right now at this moment?
Wait time is so weird on Zoom. So I'm a teacher, I'm used to waiting, but staring at people's faces, staring back at mine is just y'all. It's weird. So here's what I'll offer, because I already know my best friend asked this question. So I already know she asked this question, but I will offer that I think almost every speech that he did works for this moment in time. I've spent the last 2 weeks reading through his speeches. If you've not read Letters from Birmingham Jail, you got to read the whole speech. And what's powerful there is Dr. King talks about both Republicans and Democrats. And he says equally they're problematic. So the Republicans are openly anti-Black, but the Democrats are quiet. And I see that playing itself out here in our nation right now, whether it's Black Lives Matter or the election. Yeah, there's the obvious bad actors, but there's a lot of people that are just quiet. And that quietness is actually really dangerous. In my mind, when you're quiet about a thing, you make it okay. What you are saying with your silence is that thing's okay. That's okay. Go ahead and do that. I'm not going to riot with you. I'm not going to go tear down the American flag with you at the Capitol, but I'm also not going to say anything about it. And that is dangerous, because it opens the door then for people to believe it's okay. That kind of behavior is okay. And so that is my challenge with, and I think that's what Dr. King would say. I think he would have a lot to say. I also think that I've heard a lot of people say in the last week or so, last few days especially, this is not really America. This is not who, it's just those people. It's not who we really are. I think what Dr. King would say if he were alive today, this is exactly who we are. This is who we were in 1965. This is who we were in 1966. This is why I died. This is where we are today. And I believe part of the reason we are here is because we have not had these conversations. We've thought if we just ignore it, sweep it under the rug, put a beautiful carpet over it. It'll get better. It's like a festering sore. If you've ever cut yourself open and you don't clean it out and you just put a Band-Aid on it, what happens? It gets icky and nasty and pussy. That's where we are today. And so I think what Dr. King would say is we got to deal with this stuff. In some ways we're further ahead, but in other ways we are no further ahead than we were the day he was assassinated. And I think he would call us on that. And he would say, y'all have not done your work. I gave my life for this and you have not done your work.
Hey, Erin. So
Yeah.
on that note, what do you think he would feel about the people that are justifying the riots as the same, that the riot at the Capitol was the same as the riots that are fighting for humanity? And to me, you know me, I'm the friend she keeps talking about, and I just will tell you guys, she has the patience of a champ, okay? So just believe her when she says, walk away, take a deep breath. I don't know how she does it, but she does it, okay? So I've been there, and she just listen, she's not lying, okay? So, but I don't have much patience for the people that feel like the riots at the Capitol are justified based on the quote unquote riots from the summer.
Yeah, that's good. And first, so one of the things, I've had lots of people say that on social media. So I'm on Twitter and Facebook, and I've had a lot of conservatives say, Erin, where were you back when the BLM riots were happening? Well, first of all, there's BLM protests and there's riots. They're two very different things. And I don't know how you marched or if you marched, but my church this summer, and there's the march that was very peaceful. And then there were people that came from the outside and they terrorized and they rioted and they threw stuff. And so those are two very different things. And so I see a lot of my conservative friends getting that mixed up. They have mixed up the protests, the peaceful marches, which I have no problem with at all. I love the peaceful marches. They get that mixed up with after dark when Antifa and other groups came and destroyed things. Two very different things. And so I try to clear that up with my friends. But I also would say that the riot on our nation's capital last week, as well as the riot in Olympia last week, were about this notion that an election was stolen. So here's the deal. I can't remember how many courts they've gone to now suggesting that the election was stolen, and every single one of those cases has been thrown out. They haven't had enough evidence. And so to me, it's false. It's a false, this notion that we're going to fight because the election has been, you just lost. I mean, this is what happens in elections, that one side wins, one side loses. I mean, I think back to 4 years ago, Hillary Clinton had more votes in her favor than Trump did. But did you see Democrats protesting? They didn't march places, right? I mean, just lost. This is what happens in elections. There's going to be a winner. There's going to be a loser, right? And so I think the idea that what they did was the same as what happened for Black folks who saw their lives. Man, all of my children have been followed by police. I am not anti-police at all. In fact, my husband's dad was police for 25 years. All three of my children have been followed by police. All three have been pulled over for no reason by police. In fact, all three of them, while riding their bikes in our neighborhood in the state capitol, have been pulled over by police and asked to produce their identification. I want you to think about that. Asked to prove that they deserve to be in their own neighborhood where we have lived for 15 years. So but it goes back to what I started at the very beginning with. If you don't know these stories, it's easy to write them off and to act as if people are just making that up. This is why we have to tell our stories. So when people hear me, I'm an executive, I'm very successful, and they hear me say, my own children have been followed by police. Now suddenly it's, oh, wow, okay. But guess what? Because we don't share our stories and we just see some article in a newspaper or on TV, we don't believe it because we're not actually hearing the person share their story. We have got to share our stories. I think about what you talked about. Is it Jingyi? Yeah. Just go back to China, all of my Chinese and Korean and Vietnamese friends, the numbers of them who've been told to go back where you came from because of the coronavirus, the China virus, right? But if you're a white person and you have no Asian friends, and so you haven't actually heard anyone say that, you could think, oh, that's not a big deal. Well, I know it's a big deal because I've had friends in stores get yelled at in the last 3 or 4 months. You brought the virus here. And because they're my friends, that hurts. And I got to speak up on behalf of them, right? But because we don't tell our stories, we believe lies. We believe these lies that we hear on Facebook or we see on Twitter. It's why we have to tell our stories. It's why we have to share our stories with people. And here's what I believe. All those people in the Capitol that were, look at who was there. Do you think they have Black friends? Do you think they have Asian friends? No. And so they have one story. They have a story about Black people that we are all bad and we're dangerous, right? Because they don't have any real friends that they're listening to hear the pain of our stories, right? And that's why for me, I work really hard, and Rashay can attest to this. I work hard to tell my story to conservative people. I work hard to reach out to people in white, rural. In fact, Rashay lives in Riverside. Well, she doesn't live there. She works in Riverside, Washington, which is north of Spokane. And I speak at her school every year because those white children need to hear my story, because they will never meet someone like me just in Riverside. How many Black people are there, Rashay, at Riverside High School? 2, exactly. Right? So the chances of her students ever meeting a Black person are very small. So guess what? Rashay brings me into her classroom, brings me to her school. Those children need to hear my story, right? And so we've got to start with the story, because once we have been made human, once I see you as human and as having, then I have to care about your needs. But if I can write you off as less than human, I mean, think about the Holocaust, World War II, right? How were people able to treat Jews so badly? They saw them as less than human. If you can see someone like an animal and not as a human, then you can write them off. You can do horrible things to them. Once you see them as human, as having value, then our human instinct is to care, to show concern. And that's why the story is so important.
All right. We have another participant who mentioned in the chat box. I hope I'm saying the name right. Garland, who mentioned one of Dr. King's quotes, which is, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere." And I believe that relates so much to what you've just recently said about being silent is the most dangerous thing. Not because silent, not just because silent of not doing anything. Being silent, which means that you are permitting someone to do injustice and not fight for injustice, you know?
Yeah.
And this quote is relates so much to what you've said just now. Any of the participants who would like to join?
Well, I would just add to that last quote too. This is why, as much as Dr. King cared about Black people, he cared about more than that. And that's why he said that quote, is he cared about more than just Black people. I think we make him really small, right? Part of the reason he won the Nobel Peace Prize is because his vision for America, his vision for justice was so much bigger than just the Black community. And so I just want to offer that I believe he would care about how even like transgender people are treated. I believe he would care about refugees and immigrants. I believe he would care about undocumented people. I mean, I think that he would have something to say about anyone who's forced to live in the margins in this country. And so I just want to be clear that although he started because of the rights of Black people, I really believe over time, the more he got to see systems, the more he developed this passion. Wow, it's more than just Black people. Like there are other people that are being marginalized. There are other people that are not being treated well. Oh, that's so good. So good. Whatever affects one directly, it affects all indirectly. It can never be what I ought to be until you are what you ought to be. This is the interrelated structure of reality. That's so good. Yeah, and I love that too. The time is always right to do what is right. I think that's so, and here's what I would say to you all too. I have a lot of students that I'm working with now who feel hopeless and helpless. Like there's just so much to be done. Here's the thing, you can't do it all and you can't do it by yourself. But what if each one of us were to do something, right? Like what if each one of us were to say, I'm gonna get together with some friends and we're gonna go do something, like pick a thing that you're really passionate about. I have a friend here in Olympia who is a chef. And when COVID hit, she had just gotten a restaurant and she had to close it right away because they shut down the restaurants. And she said, well, you know what? I'm going to cook out of my kitchen and I'm going to feed people, because at the time stores down here were not really open where I live. And she said, I'm going to cook for people. And then I'm also going to donate food to homeless people. So she began to do this thing, and she cooked like 150 meals the first couple of weeks. She's up to 1,000 meals a week that she's cooking and giving away. And now she does have a restaurant and she's still giving away. And it's so cool to watch this friend of mine who just said, I got a kitchen and I have food and I love to cook and there are people who need. And so here's what I would say to you. What's in your hands? What do you already have in your hand? What are your skills and talents? What are your passions? What are the resources you have? So maybe you speak multiple languages, right? I think about Mandarin, and maybe you speak Spanish, maybe you speak Tagalog. I don't know what you speak, but could you use what's in your hands? What are the languages you speak? What are the resources you have? I decided when COVID hit to just go online and begin to teach for free. It's what I had in my hands. I had a computer and I had Facebook and Twitter, and I just went live on Facebook. And I did that for 83 days in a row. And you know what? It opened doors that I could never have imagined before. And now I get to serve people all over the world because on March 15th, I decided to say, what's in my hands? I'm going to give that away. So I think Dr. King would say, what's in your hands? What do you have? You have a mouth, you have a computer, you're in school right now. A lot of you have special skills. Maybe you can code or program. How could you use that to fight some issue? Maybe you don't march. Maybe you don't like public speaking. Maybe you do. Find something though, and use what's in your hand and give it away. And imagine if each one of us were to just use what's in our hand and give it away. Imagine who we could become.
I think we have time for another question, something to tickle our brain. One question is that if Dr. King were alive, or we're still alive today, would things be different? This question will be for the participants and for Erin herself. Whoever's comfortable with answering the question, you're free to do so.
Hi.
Hi.
If he were alive today, I was actually talking to my dad about.
Oh, we lost you. Oh, there we go.
Oh, sorry. Hi.
Hi.
Yeah, me and my dad feel very strongly about MLK Day and everything. And we were talking about this the other night, and he said that he doesn't think that things would be so dramatically different if MLK was alive. And I feel like, I mean, I kind of wonder what else he could have done, like what else he could have impacted. And I feel like he just had such a great impact already just within his death that he would just kind of continue on what he's continuing on.
Yeah.
He would still have the same message and everything, but I don't know if everything would be like that different.
Yeah. Anybody else thoughts?
For me, I think differently. I think if he still exists right now, the world can be shifted dramatically, because I think his existence show others there's a living proof that this person continually working on the justice all over the world. And he's working on not only people of color but also like poor and all those, and it feels different points of the spectrum. So I think, well, for me, I need to find person to look up on. I need to find mentor that I can follow on a daily basis. I think when I take cold showers, I know this mentor, he take cold showers every single day. And I know I'm not the only one who take cold showers, and the people I look up on, and he's doing that even like to cold bath every single morning. So it's kind of having a person that just is there, even it's like far away, but the thing that knowing that he's leaving this world, and he's person I want to be in the future, it gave me such a motivation that I might not able to have if this person doesn't exist. I think if Martin Luther King, if he exists, lots of people will look like will have like double motivations or even more motivation to become just like him and to have the same mindset, not become just like him, but have the same mindset. So this can influence so many people. I think it will be very different if he like continue his work till his death.
You know, one of the things I think about in terms of if he were still alive, and I just heard this, one of my friends works for the CIA. Actually, I don't think he works for this. I think he works for another government agency like the CIA. He can't tell me. But I talked to him on Sunday because I wanted to get some information about what was actually happening in the Capitol. And I was like, if I can trust anyone, it's him. So I called my friend in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And here's what he said to me. He said, Erin, who are the leaders in the Black community at the national level? And there's not really anyone right now. So that generation, Reverend Jesse Jackson, Al Sharpton, are older now. And so even though they were kind of those national figures, a lot of that generation has either passed away or they're tired. They're tired, y'all. They're tired. They've been working a long time. And so, you know, one of the things I think is if Dr. King had stayed around, going back to something that Jingy said, who could have been raised up under him, right? To become the mentor so that you'd have this layer of leaders now who weren't exactly like him, but had that same mentality. That's what I imagine, that he would have raised up other leaders underneath him to step into his shoes. And we just don't have, we have an absence of that kind of national leadership right now. And I think that is a problem. And the reality of Black Lives Matter, the way their organization was created, it was created to not have leaders. So it was created as an organization. It was intentionally created to not have a president and a vice president. And so even though we say Black Lives Matter, what BLM means in Seattle is very different than what it means in Atlanta or LA or New York, because there's not one leader. Right. And so that is a good thing and it's a bad thing. What it means, though, as a nation, we don't have a person or people to look up to and say, OK, let's do it like this. We don't have that. And I think that's the thing that we are missing from not having him present, is that we don't have this model of that kind of, people need a figurehead. They need somebody to look to and say, OK, here's how you do that. Yeah, you take cold showers in the morning, right? Like that, those things that people do. And that's where I think, what I think we need. I mean, I try to be that as much as I can here in the state of Washington with my little people group, but I'm just me. I'm not at that level at all. But it's what I aspire to. It's not that I want to be in charge of anything, but I know that people need a point person that they can say, okay, that's what that person represents. We're going to follow and try to lead in this way.
Any other participants would like to share the thoughts or have any questions for Erin?
You know, I'll type in the chat my like Instagram and Twitter if you ever want to follow, or I mean, this is the kind of stuff that I'm talking about and thinking about all the time. So feel free to reach out. If you send me a private message on social media, I'll respond to you. But I'll just include and I have 2 TED Talks. So if you like watching TED Talks, I have 2 TEDx talks. So you can just Google Erin Jones.
Also, if any of the participants haven't done yet, you can follow the campus activities team.
Y'all are quiet. Y'all are quiet.
Yeah, it's the end of a long week, I think.
I know, yeah. I feel that. I feel that.
Yeah. Well, Erin, we are just so happy that you were able to spend some time with us tonight. You had some great thoughts and things to put out there. You've got me thinking about what's in my hands, and I will definitely be kind of looking at that this weekend. What is it that I have that I'm not doing or sharing with other people? And so thank you for bringing that forward. And yeah, we're just so happy and appreciative that you could be here tonight. And I want to thank everyone else that came tonight to this meeting. And like Erin said, she has her contact information there in the chat. So please reach out to her. And I just want to wish everyone a very nice evening and a great holiday weekend.
Thank you, everybody.